When the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70 and the city of Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, it wasn't the end of Jewish presence here in the land. We sometimes think that it was, but it wasn't. In the year 70, Jerusalem is captured by the Romans, the temple is destroyed, the city is destroyed, but Jews continue to live in Jerusalem, and Jews continue to live all over the land of Israel. We're simply a conquered people under the Roman rule. But about 70 years after the destruction of the temple is in the year 70 or so, in the 130s, as we're getting close to 70 years after the destruction, remember that number 70, we rise and revolt again against the Romans. Why 70? Because when the first temple was destroyed and the Jews were taken to Babylon, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat, we wept, we sang, and we remembered Zion. What are we told by our prophets? By Jeremiah, by Ezekiel, that 70 years later redemption will come. And so it is. We come back to Jerusalem, we rebuild the temple, the second temple period, which will stand in the 500s and the 400s and the 300s and the 200s and the 100s and the 1st century BC and then the 1st century CE, destroyed by the Romans. So as we get close to 70 years, apparently Jews begin to think that God's salvation is going to come again, is going to come just like it did, just like Ezekiel and Jeremiah promised us. And they rise and revolt against the Roman Empire. This is in the 130s. That doesn't go well at all. Jerusalem is totally destroyed, and the Romans will bar Jews from the pagan Romans will bar Jews from living in Judea, in Jerusalem, and in Bethlehem, and Jewish life will shift to where? To the Galilee, and down here to South Judah, way down in the bottom, far away from Bethlehem and from Jerusalem, which was the center of Judean life. And apparently the Romans, the pagan Romans, left the Jews alone here. And already by the end of the 200s, we already begin to have a Jewish town here. In the 300s, as you well know, the Roman Empire becomes Christian, the Byzantine Empire, and they will rule here all the way until the Muslim conquest in the 600s, about 300 years. Unfortunately, under the Roman Byzantine Christian Empire, the persecution of the Jews that started with the Roman pagan empire will continue and even intensify. But we're coming here essentially then to a Jewish town called Susia, where Jews lived here in the land of Israel, in the land of Judah, after the destruction of the temple by the Romans, primarily in the 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s, even into the 700s, perhaps about 400 years. Today, we have the ruins of the town here, but what I want to draw your attention to here as we're entering the town is we can look at the highest point within the town, and what would we expect to find at the highest point in a Jewish town here 1,500 years ago? The synagogue. And that's what we're going to head to now. We're going to take a look at the synagogue of Susia from the Roman, Byzantine, also called the Talmudic era, from the 300s to about the 700s CE. Folks, this is a synagogue that was built 1,700 years ago by Jews who escaped from Jerusalem to the north when the Romans destroyed it and found refuge here and built flourishing Jewish communities here in deep, deep South Judah. I'm facing eastward. Behind me is westward. That means if we go straight ahead eastward, we get to Ein Gedi and the Dead Sea. If we continue straight ahead westward, we get to the Mediterranean, down near Gaza and Ashkelon, down near Gush Katif and Ashkelon. We're right at that southern tip of Judah. We have found a number of Jewish communities here from this period, the 300s to about the 700s CE, after the destruction of the Jewish community. We have found 4 synagogues here in this area in archaeology, and see how magnificent the synagogue is. You see the entranceway, there's an entrance courtyard, and then we come into the synagogue itself. There are mosaic floors all around, dedications, people who dedicated 1,700 years ago and 1,600 years ago and 1,500 years ago, people who made donations to build, to support the community. And one of the great things here in the synagogue in Susia and in Ma'on and the other synagogues in this area, the inscriptions in the mosaic are in Hebrew and Aramaic. When you go up to the Galilee, we're already seeing more Greek, a little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic, but more Greek. And the rabbis say that the people of Judah held on to their language, whereas the people of the Galilee did not hold on to their language, and that therefore, say the rabbis, the Jewish communities of Judah held on to their heritage, to their faith in God, to their connection, much more so than the Jews in the Galilee who had assimilated more into the Greek and Roman culture. And we see that here in the archaeology. We have it in the text that tells us more Hebrew down here, and then when we find the archaeology, that's what we find in the inscriptions. Now, there's also a very strong tradition of synagogues facing Jerusalem. Now, synagogues start facing Jerusalem only after the destruction of the temple, because where the temple stood in Jerusalem, if you wanted Jerusalem or the temple, you would go to Jerusalem. No need to orient your synagogue buildings in your town to do that. Synagogues had a different function than the temple. As far as we know, they had a prayer function like in the temple, but of course no sacrifice like was in the temple. We know there were community functions that took place in the community synagogues, community meals, Torah study, and some sort of prayer as well. But we don't have a lot of details for the early synagogue. But we do know that once the temple is destroyed, synagogues begin orienting themselves towards Jerusalem. Now, if you're in the United States, for example, you'll see that most synagogues face eastward, because from the United States in the Western Hemisphere, facing eastward towards Israel, towards Jerusalem. But here in the land of Israel, well, we're in southern Judah. Where is Jerusalem? North. Jerusalem is north. So you can see that the synagogue faces northward, but the entrance to the synagogue is to the east. And this is another ancient tradition that when possible, one should enter a synagogue from the east, remembering the sense of God sort of coming to us from the east, make a path for the Lord coming in from the desert, Solu, Derech, Ladonai. The children of Israel enter the land of Israel under Joshua from the east. So east becomes very, very important in terms of that. However, the synagogue itself is going to face northward. So people would come into the synagogue. They would start out in the common area in front, which serves to really be a barrier between the profane, if you will, the regular daily life that's outside and the holiness that's in the synagogue. You have this sort of middle area, which is, I guess, it's for the mix and mingle place. It's also time to get yourself together. You're about to enter a place of greater holiness. And maybe we can take a look inside the synagogue here from the top step. So here we can see a little bit of the interior of the synagogue. It's been partially reconstructed by the archaeologists. You can see the seating area, which would have gone around. You can see on the western side and on the southern side of the synagogue for the seating area. And look what's on the northern side, facing Jerusalem. Like you'll see in many synagogues today, this was the bima, this is the Aron Kodesh, this is the raised platform for prayer and for reading the Torah from and for keeping the Torah. And you see here a recreation. They found parts of this actually made out of marble that was here in the synagogue. The originals are in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, but here we have a reconstruction so we can get a sense of what was here. So you can see they've represented for us the ark where the Torah scrolls would have been kept, and then beneath it a sort of cordoned off area from where the Torah would have been read to the congregation, and possibly the prayers would have been led from, and perhaps the sermons would have been delivered from. You can see the stone steps still there that led up to the ark that house the Torah scroll. You can see the magnificent mosaics here on the floor. And folks, let's remember, we're talking here about the 300s, the 400s, the 500s, the 600s. This is after the destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple by the Romans. This is in the period where the pagan Roman Empire becomes the Christian Byzantine Roman Empire. It's a time, unfortunately, of tremendous persecution of Jews by the Roman Empire. And it's a time of poverty for some of the Jewish communities here, but look what they invest in the synagogue. Look, you get a sense of the priorities of the community here, the spirituality of the community. They've adorned the synagogue with inscriptions. You can see the menorah on the partition. There's menorah in the mosaic floor, all remembering Jerusalem, remembering our connection. When the temple is destroyed, we lose that intimacy with God. And a Jewish concept of the temple in Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies, is where God's divine presence somehow dwells on earth, the Shekhinah, that aspect of God that we can relate to. And after the destruction of the temple, Jewish tradition will try to bring some of that intimacy with God, recreate it as it was in the temple, in the synagogues. Jewish followers of Jesus, which will lead into Christianity, will have a different idea. We will have intimacy with God, with the idea of God dwelling with us through Jesus, dwelling in our hearts and dwelling in communities. But we have the two streams, if you will, trying to answer the same question. With the loss of the temple in Jerusalem, how do we recreate that intimacy with God? And here we see how the Jewish communities of Judah in the 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s, and 700s situated themselves the highest points in the town. Beautiful, magnificent synagogue, great love and great dedication to try to find and recreate that intimate relationship with God that we could experience within the temple. Here we are right outside the entrance to the city of Susia. And what do we find right outside the city? Burial sites. As Jewish law and Jewish tradition mandates, burials should not be done inside the city, they should be done outside the city. And here we see a burial cave. Families would have caves where their loved ones would be interred. And how were they sealed? Many of us know, of course, scriptural references to burial caves that are sealed with rolling stone. Now, sometimes I think people imagine, a big boulder that you might roll. The truth is, poorer people might use that. They might use a big boulder to seal up a burial cave entrance. But certainly families who could afford a little nicer, they would have a track, just like a sliding door, in which the stone could be rolled back and forth, rolled out so that you can get in to bury a body and tend a body, rolled back to seal it up. And of course, this takes us to the site of the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection in Jerusalem, where we also have a burial of Jesus in Jerusalem, and we also have a burial cave described with a rolling stone that serves as its doorway of the entrance. And here we have a really good example of that. So you can see the picture of the rolling stone sealing up a burial cave right in front, behind me.
Here we are in the center of the Jewish community of Susia, a community located south of Hebron in what is referred to as the Hebron Hills, a community that was established in 1980. Now, we just saw the ancient archaeological site of Susia, and so it is really no coincidence that when the first families come here to establish a new community, they too call this community Susia, because in their minds, what they are doing is coming back, re-establishing a Jewish community in the very same area where there was an ancient community of Susia 1,500 years ago. Now, you may recall the way the ancient synagogue looked like. There were these 4 columns and a roof that was kind of somewhat, there was a part of the roof is original and the rest you have a reconstructed pointy roof. Here, this synagogue was built to be a reconstruction as close as possible to that original synagogue in ancient Susia. So in this sense, we kind of close the circle. Now, who are these people that come here? They're a group of families, mostly from the south, and they come here and establish a community in 1980. It is one of the first communities in this area south of Hebron to be established. It is still a small community. There are fewer than 200 families living here, probably no more than 1,000 people. It is not a kibbutz. Everybody lives their own lives. Everybody goes to work. The kids go to school, and then they come home. They are kind of at the edge of this Judean hill / Judean desert area on the way to the real more desert areas of the Negev, not so far from Beersheba. So people here, more often than not, will travel to Beersheba than they will north to Jerusalem, which is much further away. Okay, one of the things that is so exciting for me when I come here to Susia is to see with my own eyes the ancient people who lived here in Judah being reestablished here today in our lifetimes. I mean, there's something about the Susia and the Susia that enables us to understand that we are really living in our times the modern miracle of the return to Zion, of the redemption, of the restoration. Now, this is a community. One of the things that's so neat about this community is they have a high school for boys. It is a biblical high school for boys, and it is very much grounded in the idea of studying everything that has to do with the land of Israel. One of the basic parts of the program, of the curriculum for the students here, is that once a week they go out, Bible in hand, and they hike in this area. They learn every stone, they learn every tree, and they learn everything there is to know about what Jewish life was like here, whether in the biblical time or after the biblical time, in the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, which takes us all the way up to the 8th, 9th century, something like that. So it really is a place where not only have Jews come back to restore Jewish life in this area, but in transmitting that tradition to the next generation, they are ensuring a generation that will be so rooted and connected to the land of Israel and will have the knowledge they need to be able to transfer that knowledge, that depth, and that passion to the next generation as well. Here in Susia, we've been very involved at Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. We have supported children's, and we've supported playground here. We've supported security needs. We've supported a social center here. We're doing whatever we can here to make Jewish life here in Susia that much easier and make their community that much stronger. This is Sondra Oster Baras with Christian Friends of Israeli Communities right here in Susia. I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.